Maybe it'll recognize my face. Anybody else have that problem? Good morning. My name is Bruce Sherman. I'm normally looking at the backs of your heads from the AV booth back there. That's why my advice to all speakers is to start talking and keep talking to give us in the back a chance to adjust the microphone levels. This is the end of my public service announcement. When Paul asked me for some help with the sermons this spring, I didn't respond initially, but then realized I had an opportunity to talk about Sister Parish. I believe that Sister Parish is transformative. I've been involved in our Sister Parish group since I retired from going to sea about 15 years ago. I've made 3 trips to Central America with Sister Parish, and I'm currently in my second 3-year term on the Sister Parish Board of Directors. We've had a board member from our church for the last 10 years or so, and I find that it's a great way to both support Sister Parish and to keep us connected with the northern churches in Guajira. Please consider joining our board next year when I step down. It's been an incredible experience for me, and I highly recommend it. Let's talk about Sister Parish. The Sister Parish movement was born out of violence. Richard Fenske, who along with Vicky Schmidt founded Sister Parish, wrote a book about Sister Parish called En la Buena Lucha, In the Good Struggle, the Sister Parish Movement. His penultimate chapter is called Blessed Are the Peacemakers, and is about how to do practical, nonviolent action. His action plan is very similar to the anti-racism work that we have been doing here at Wallingford. Let me recall a couple of the incidents in El Salvador that had a huge impact on Guajira, El Salvador, and also us. Today is May 15th, 2022. The Sumpo River Massacre took place in Chalatenango, El Salvador on May 13th, 1980, 42 years ago, during the Salvadoran Civil War. This is the 42nd anniversary of that terrible time. All of the authorities involved, including the armies of El Salvador and Honduras, the United States and other governments, and even the NGOs denied that it happened. Eventually, over the years, the story gradually came out. Estimates of lives lost range from 200 to 800, with the higher number more likely. This happens within a short distance of what is now Guajira, and people that we know lost relatives that day. I won't go into the details of the massacre here, but I encourage you to look it up. We see much violence in our world today as well, but this is one that affected friends of ours whose parents and grandparents and friends were lost that day. Another anniversary that's very important to both Guajira and El Salvador happened 9 years later, so the Civil War was still going on. Imagine how difficult a decade or longer war must have been. As a force of guerrillas was advancing on the capital of San Salvador, a special Salvadoran army unit, having previously cased UCA, UCA is the abbreviation for University of Central America, which is a Jesuit school, they went into the college and brutally murdered 6 Jesuit priests and 2 women sheltering in the residence there. Many of us have visited the site of that massacre on a Sister Parish delegation. On my last trip to El Salvador in 2019, we went to a ceremony for the 40th anniversary of the massacre. Thousands attended, including the Archbishop and other dignitaries. It was a very moving experience. Father John Cortina, well known to us, Jesuit faculty at UCA himself, was spending time in Guajira, Chalatenango province on that fateful night. Guajira was a newly established town formed by refugees returning from the camps in Honduras. Father Cortina taught engineering at UCA, but had been very interested in doing actual building rather than just teaching engineering or doing design work for NASA, which he had previously done. His plan had been to return to the university that night, but friends in Guajira urged him to stay for his safety. The next day, driving to San Salvador, he heard on the radio on the death of his fellow priests and even the announcement of his own death, which had been mistakenly assumed. He returned to Guajira and never lived at UCA again, but devoted himself to the building of Guajira. He was instrumental in the water system, building and designing houses. He even designed the nearby highway bridge across the Rio Lumpa. Many in our congregation have met Father John, although he died before I visited Guajira. He's still a huge influence on the community, and his house has become a museum where we often gather when we're there. Sister Parish was born out of this long civil war, which was also going on with a slightly different plot in nearby Guatemala, where Sister Parish is also active, and other Central American countries. Richard Fenske and Vicki Schmidt asked the question, how can we in the United States make a difference in the lives of those who are now rebuilding their country from the ground up? Richard was a Lutheran minister living in Nicaragua and later Guatemala, struggling in real time to figure out how he and others could help. Richard and his wife Barbara were living in a slum perched on the edge of a dump in Guatemala City. They helped establish a craft collective now called UPAVIM, which was one of the first sister parish communities. Richard, now called Ricardo, had a couple of different immersion experiences. Remember that word, immersion experiences, that brought him and his wife to Guatemala. Many of us have had immersion experiences. Getting saved at summer camp was the first one I can remember. Anybody else? And I have a friend who claims he walked down the aisle at revival meetings 7 times while growing up, so he probably has the record. I've done therapy immersion experiences, and if any of you have been on sister parish trips, you have been through an immersion experience. Delegation trips are designed to create the opportunity for you to change. Having seen the results among our young people and not so young people after a trip to El Salvador, I can assure you that it is working well. Let me take a few minutes to review some of the ideas that Ricardo writes about in his book, On la Buena Lucha, In the Good Struggle. Richard met Vicki Schmidt at a conference in Miami, a social ministries conference. At the time, he was experimenting with a sistering model linking 2 communities. Vicki soon joined Richard in creating the sister parish model and establishing a long-lived organization in Central America. Richard was the first sister parish director and lived in Guatemala City. For the delegation trips, they decided that stays at homes, orientation in the capital, and reflection time every day were each important in setting the tone for a delegation. The goal in plunging into the difficult human conditions we see in Central America was transformation in the person and in the life of the congregation from which they came. We have certainly seen those changes in the more than 75 adults and young people who have gone to Guajira with Sister Parish from this congregation. Especially among the younger people, these trips have had a dramatic influence on their future lives. So, compassion is the grounding force and idea in Sister Parish's theological base. Compassion is to hear, feel, and bear the suffering of another. Most people live in less than human conditions. This dehumanization calls on compassionate people to join the struggle for liberation. The Sister Parish immersion arouses this compassion. We realize that we're not going to fix things, nor is our goal to change the people we meet, although both they and us change in this process. Now, most missionary effort uses the charity model, where we, richer and wiser, bring goods and knowledge to the poor indigenous people. We do not use this charity model. Rather, Sister Parish seeks solidarity with our linkage friends, where we walk together and learn from one another. We share our realities and strategies for confronting the dominant culture. We hold each other accountable, and we enjoy our friendships. The Sister Parish model includes, as mentioned earlier, homestays, orientation in the capital, and reflection time each day. These are designed to create in each delegate a deep and personal spiritual crisis, a plunge into tragic human conditions of long standing. Transformation in the person and in the life of the congregation is the goal. So both sides in our sistering relationship are people of faith. The most important aspect of this faith is the faith that the other party is approaching our relationship with a genuine goal of creating a new and better future. Both sides are open to this unlikely relationship. So in our sistering relationship, disillusion is replaced by hope. Discontent is replaced with optimism. Isolation is changed into community. Lack of purpose into focused commitment. And transformation comes to the individual and the congregation. The ultimate goal of Sister Parish? Peacemaking. Sister Parish was born during conflict and war. Peace is our goal. Ricardo also talks about the dominant culture. Our dominant culture is characterized by an economics of greed by political numbness and by a captive God who lines up with current cultural values. Latin America is a classic example of dominant culture's evil. As Ricardo points out, this is maybe my favorite line in his whole book. Our Marines spent so much time in Cuba and Nicaragua in the past 150 years that baseball became the national sport of both countries. Yeah. There's a long and dirty laundry list of our intervention in Central America with our money, our military, and our culture. It is not a pretty list. The problems in Latin America are inextricably linked with Spanish and U.S. colonialism. The dehumanizing force of evil manifested in our society and in the world has many characteristics. Ask yourself if our institutions exude compassion or numbness, honesty or dishonesty, integrity or duplicity, humanization or dehumanization, openness, secrecy, generosity or greed, life or death. It's become clear in the past few years that the evil of the dominant culture is not only exported to influence other countries, but that evil is hard at work here, right in our own country. I think of right-wing evangelicals who are motivated by wealth and political influence. So, is there any alternative to the dominant culture? We've certainly seen a lot of pushback against it with our Black Lives Matter movement, our LGBTQ movement. I see us as being in the very same struggle that we have experienced in El Salvador, a struggle that opposes the dominant culture of greed. The Old Testament, the long arc of the Old Testament, is a story of that dominant culture possibly peaking with Solomon with all the wealth and power and domination, and then its failure. This was followed by the renewal that we see in the prophets. So much about our lives and culture is cyclical, and no culture exists without change. No culture is immortal. Richard Fenske describes an alternate culture. He said, there must be something other than Western-style democracy and liberal capitalism that will include all people in the good life. Freeing the oppressed from their poverty requires more than blaming them for the economic problems and then cutting them off. It requires a new way of looking at the world. In the alternate culture, instead of economics as greed, we have economics of equality. In the memorial passage from Deuteronomy, there shall be no poor among us. We had a lesson recently about manna in the desert. This is a beautiful example of economic equality. No matter how much was gathered, each person had just the amount that they needed. Then the politics of compassion replaces political numbness. The politics of compassion asks us to neighbor, used as a verb, the people around us. The Good Samaritan neighbored the stranger. The words from a Charles Wesley hymn seem appropriate here. Love divine, all loves excelling, joy of heaven to earth come down. Fix us in thy humble dwelling, all thy faithful mercies crown. Jesus, thou art all compassion, pure unbounded love thou art. Visit us with thy salvation, enter every trembling heart. Fenske argues that God is compassion. Jesus is compassion. We are to be compassion. Our culture is to be compassion. Impossible? And la buena lucha. That is our good struggle. A captive God is replaced by a God who does not wear the face of the dominant culture, called by Fenske a free God. We don't have to look very far to find the captive God here in the United States. Who knew that God loved money and hated women and the poor? All of this leads us to the nuts and bolts of compassion. How do we do that? What does it look like? The idea of redemptive compassion is an important idea in his book. Redemptive compassion is appropriate and important here. Compassion is the holding, nurturing, protecting of life, much as a mother or a parent would do for a child. Redemption is deliverance, freedom, and the fulfilled promise of well-being. Fenske says, redemptive compassion is the essential component in the authentic community. Compassion nurtures, but it also lets go. It lives at the junction of interdependence and dependence. It uses the dynamic between individualism and community. Walter Brueggemann, in his book, The Prophetic Imagination, says that the alternate culture is the gathering of people to, quote, nourish, nurture, and evoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. This is a goal of Sister Parish. So if you've gone on a delegation with Sister Parish, you might have experienced this path and reactions to it. Let me review some of the reactions and actions that you might have felt both during and after participating in a delegation. When you first visit El Salvador, you likely feel compassion or at least pity. Many of us have not seen third world conditions or have not experienced a big Latin American city with its very different economics and living conditions. In the second stage, you might start looking at, well, what are the root causes for this poverty? Much poverty is structural and involves tax codes, legal system, powerful people and organizations with impunity from the law, includes other structural elements like racism, sexism, inept welfare systems, power, and corruption. These words were written about Central America, but it doesn't take too much imagination to see every one of these in our own country. A common third stage in developing mature compassion is to understand that the poor have a very good idea how to fix the problem. We can learn from the poor and they from us. However, step 4 in the process could be recognition that we should not romanticize the poor. This romanticization is actually a divisive mechanism and not a nurturing one. Finally, when returning from a delegation, it is so important to enter the field of dialogue. Engage others when you return, share your new insights, work together for change. I will conclude with Ricardo Fenske's words. Work consciously on having in every encounter faith, love, and humility. Before and during conversations or meetings, ask yourself if you possess these 3 qualities. It was the dialogue you had with your sister parish that introduced you to the face of poverty and to the face of God. Only in this attitude of faith, love, and humility may we walk on this holy ground. We engage the dominant culture, but we don't give up on it. Our task is to make it more compassionate by holding it more accountable. This is our struggle. This is Sister Parish.